Hello, and welcome to this first edition of Reinsurance Hot Topics presented by CCR Re. The aim of this series is to bring together recognized experts to explore major questions in the field of insurance and reinsurance. My name is David Roy, and the experts joining me in the studio today are Patrick Delalot, Chief Business Development Officer at CCR Re. Hello.
Hello, pleased to see you.
David Moncoulon, Head of Modeling at CCR.
Thank you.
Olivier Choquet, Senior Claims Advisor at CCR Re.
Exactly. Hello.
Hello. And Olivier Boniface, President of La Compagnie des Experts, which is a union of loss adjusting experts. Olivier, hello.
Exactly. Hello.
We're here today to talk about climate change and its impact on the reinsurance sector. The effects of climate change are already here, in many cases spectacular, terrifying. We're recording this program today in Paris, where the last few years have brought unprecedented heat waves, flash flooding from sudden downpours, several once-in-a-hundred-years floods, when the Seine broke its banks. And obviously that's the low end of the scale. We're going to talk about them later, but around the world we've seen wildfires lasting for weeks, freak snowstorms in Texas, record-breaking hurricane seasons in the Caribbean, and typhoons in the Pacific. David Moncoulon, if we turn to you first, you're the head of modeling at CCR. You've worked on models exploring the impact of climate change between now and 2050. If those are the effects that we're seeing today, what's going to happen over the next 30 years?
I work in CCR and especially on the French territory, but we also have a global vision at the world scale because we are interested in also overseas territory and also providing information on CCR Re, which is part of CCR Group. And we work with Météo France, especially on the French territory, to be able to project the insured losses at the horizon 2050. And we work with them because they are able to simulate future climate at a very low scale, 20 meters resolution on the whole French territory. And then we convert this input data from Météo France into insurance losses, and then we project them in the future. So according to the pessimistic scenario, in fact, the RCP 8.5, for those who are not familiar with this scenario, it's the more pessimistic view, but already considered as possible and realistic. We expect an increase of the ratio claims on premium about 50% more in 2050.
That's compared with today?
Yes, compared with today. So, for example, if we expect an average annual loss of 1 billion euros in France due to natural disasters, in the future, we will be at 1.5 billion euro losses. And it's only in terms of annual means. For the extreme events, the increase is even higher. Yeah. And this is due to an increase of floods, an increase of storm surge, and an increase of drought on the French territory. But we have also a global vision which allows us to, from these specific results, to have a global view on the worldwide.
And just when you were saying droughts, when we were preparing this program, you said that the droughts we're seeing currently in Southern Europe, by 2050, we'll see the same ones in Northern Europe.
Yeah, today in Southern Europe, in fact, Mediterranean area, the drought are really more intense, and the occurrence of intense drought is really more frequent. But in the future, even if the Mediterranean area will be drier than today, the central part of Europe and the northern part of Europe will be more exposed to drought, and we will have an homogenic vision of drought in the future in Central Europe and in Mediterranean Europe. So the north will increase more quickly than the south.
And just on a couple of the other risks that you mentioned to give a better idea of what we're looking at, you talked about flooding. Is this flooding from storm surges? Is it from flash flooding from sudden downpours? Where is the flooding coming from?
So what's interesting is on one hand, we talk about the increase of drought on the other hand, we talk also about the increase of flooding, because in fact it's not because the average annual rainfall decrease that there is no more risk of flooding, and this is more for pluvial rain flood and an increase of the occurrence of storms and then pluvial rainfall, flash floods in the Mediterranean region, and also due to what we expect to be an increase of sea level in the world. It's not really the direct impact of the increase of sea level that will have an impact on the insurance values, but more an increase of the risk of storm surge occurring with an increase of sea level. I don't know if I'm clear, but
Okay. We can give an example for that is to say, for instance, Netherlands. Let's say half of the country is already below the sea level. Just imagine a storm with at the same time the sea level moving up, and of course they have dikes, protections, etc. But they are in danger with this climate change.
Okay. Your model, David, looked at France. Would you expect to see the same conclusions worldwide?
Of course, regarding the different countries, the most important hazards will not necessarily be the same. But for example, we conduct a study in Germany, and we have conclusions that can be compared with the conclusion in France. The expect of the increase of losses will be comparable with what we see in the northern part of France. We also model the impact of future Caribbean hurricanes on the overseas territories. And we, as you know, the hurricane trajectories will be the same, are the same, in fact, when they hit Florida or English Caribbean island or French Caribbean island. And so what we have seen in this study is also consistent with what we can expect in the other countries. So we expect an increase of the more intense hurricanes, even if there will not be necessarily more cyclones, but there will be more intense. And that's what we've seen in our study.
And we have a map up on the screen at the moment. It's just gone, with some of the risks around the world. So we're looking at wildfires in America, we're looking at extreme heat in Africa, we're looking at droughts in the north of Africa and in Europe, hurricanes in the Pacific, floods in Southeast Asia. It's those risks. Whatever happens, climate change is going to affect you wherever you are.
Yeah, it can be considered as scary, this kind of maps, but in fact, it's what many models. There are lots of models that are used by the IPCC to simulate the future impacts of climate change, and they quite agree on these different conclusions. This is a synthesis of the conclusion of the IPCC. So. We expect more forest fire, but we already seen that in the last years. And forest fire will generate damage for housings and directly also the increase of cyclones in southern Asia will be also important in terms of damage. So yes, it's a worldwide situation.
Excellent. Olivier, bringing you in at this point, David has been talking about an increase in the frequency, an increase in the intensity of climate events. Is that something that you, as a loss adjuster, are seeing on the ground?
Definitely, yes. I can say that in the light of my experience, natural hazards are more intense and more frequent. I've been a loss adjuster for 20 years, and I have seen how natural hazards have become like common things in your job. I can give you a lot of examples, a lot of different kind of natural hazards. Like we were talking about sea surge in 2004 in France, a tempest called Xynthia. There were also massive floodings in 2016, and then in 2018, the same. There's also earthquake in France in 2019 in the town of the Tail. So earthquakes impact France too. And of course, drought claims. We manage this kind of claims almost every year.
And that's new.
And that's it increased.
Okay. And I believe you were actually on the ground with Hurricane Irma.
Yes, and I think it's a good representative phenomenon of this of the climate change. The particularity of this hurricane is that in the same area, 22 years earlier, there occurred another hurricane, which was called Louis. And it's interesting to compare the both hurricanes.
So we have some of the numbers comparing the two.
Yes. Then we see that Irma was classified in category 5, while Louis was in category 4. It impacted the Caribbean Sea, if you remember. The speed of the winds with 150 miles per hour for Irma, for Louis, and 180 miles per hour for Irma, with gusts with speeds more than 200 miles per hour. It was very impressive. The diameter of the cyclone, 250 miles for Louis, while Irma there is 400 miles wide, and the amount of loss, of course. Louis, the loss was estimated at $5 billion, while Irma, the loss was estimated at $67 billion.
Yeah, and I might imagine looking on from the outside, those numbers don't look enormously different, but the scale of loss is huge. I'm guessing there must have been some development, some building, some improvement in the meantime, but that's still an order of magnitude bigger from one to the other.
Exactly. We have just talked about intensity, and what about frequency?
Yeah.
And I want to show you this photo with Irma. But Irma is not alone. There's two other hurricanes called Katia and Jose in front and at the rear. And it was not the end, because 2 weeks later, there's another hurricane that occurred in the same area. It was called Maria. And I was in the island of Saint Barthélemy. And I can see this phenomenon in the ground, and I can tell how impressive damage was.
Yeah, so we have the map there with the dates. Irma comes in, it's made landfall, it's in America on the 13th of September, and Maria is moving into the Caribbean area on the 18th, less than a week later.
Exactly.
That's extremely impressive.
Maybe there is one point about the difference in the amount of damages. That is to say that Maria went over US. And of course, that's where you have, let's say, the highest, some exposed, some insured. And it could even have been much worse if Irma was not going on the left side of Miami, but striking Miami. And then it would have been more than $100 billion for sure. Yeah.
Sure. That brings us to you, Patrick. We've just seen the impacts of climate change are felt all around the world. Does it follow that insurance coverage is roughly the same all around the world?
No. We have very different situations all over the world, depending on the wealth of the countries, depending on their regulations, depending on their cultures. You have insurance penetration, which is very low in some countries, and insurance penetration, which is very high, for instance, in Switzerland, very low in some Middle East countries. In France, we have, let's say, we are compelled to be insured as homeowners. For instance, next to France, Italy, you have only 2% of people who are insuring themselves for their residential building. So you see there are many different aspects, and that's talking about insurance penetration. And then you have the covers, the perils covers, and some are more, let's say, wide in the covers proposed than some others. Yeah. So I can develop, but
yeah, no, it's an interesting point. What drives those differences? You mentioned that in France we have obligatory cover. Okay, fine, I understand why France has that cover. Is there anything that explains why Italy is so low? Why they don't want to be insured?
I cannot explain that by myself. I feel that let's say you have to be let's say convinced about the utility of having an insurance, and to be convinced that the price which is asked for is not wasting money. You have maybe not to think that that's fate and that's it, or not relying on your family. So there are many different aspects, I think. And of course, after an event, but only after, then you have more people asking for a cover. For instance, in Japan, people are very conscious of the earthquake risk, but still they may think the earthquake premium is too much, and they will not buy it. Say about 40 to 50% of people are insured, much more than in Italy, where the earthquake risk does exist. But still, it's not 100% of people, and this is on a voluntary basis, whereby in France, because we have a, let's say, solidarity system, everybody is insured.
Okay, that gives us an idea of the insurance situation around the world. Specifically, because we're here to talk about reinsurance, if there's a natural disaster, how does a reinsurer come into play? It seems, given the sums involved, insurers can't shoulder everything on their own.
Yes, well, the purpose of reinsurance is to allow insurance companies to deliver cover to the people, but also to the corporates for high risks. And these insurance companies, however rich they may be, or they may seem to be, have limited resources compared to the commitments they take in front of the insured. To achieve the cover, they need to buy protection and to protect their surplus funds, to let them in a position to pay for the claim. So they have to protect themselves. And here comes the reinsurance. And reinsurance is providing capacity. Cover is also a difficult issue because we are taking the peak risks in terms of nat cat, but also industrial risk, big individual risk. And to be able to do that, we have to work on a worldwide basis to spread our risk in terms of geography, but in terms of lines of business as well. So reinsurance is not only dedicated to not cat event, but also covering big plane crashes or ship trapped in the Canal de Suez, or let's say you can fancy our satellite being launched and wrongly launched. So there are so many different types of risk where amounts involved are so big that if there was no insurance and no reinsurance, nobody could do it. In fact, you have to, because you have to have this cover for the industrial also, so the people and the corporates.
How do you go about organizing this? I mean, if we're looking at that insurance risk around the world, and there are different levels of coverage, it must be true that a natural disaster, however awful the human consequences, is going to have a different financial impact depending on which part of the world it's in and what the coverage is like.
Yes, let's say, of course, whenever a disaster occurs, and there are many disasters occurring each and every year, we look at where does it take place. I think, let's say, rather than how many people are involved. For instance, we had the tsunami in Indonesia, let's say 15 years ago, and let's say more than 100 people died out of it.
100,000?
100,000 yes. people. And, but this was not an insurance claim, you know, because nearly nobody was insured. Yeah. So, but if we have a bus crashing against a train in France, and with maybe 20 people involved, died or hospitalized, that will be a fair amount of money, and there will be some reinsurance. If we speak about United States, whatever hurricane will be at least $1 billion. Yeah, you know, and so this is also depending on the insurance penetration, but also the accumulation. If, let's say, with the climate change, of course, we have to know that 27% of the worldwide population is along the coast side. And when we were talking about sea surge, yeah, you know, and the level of the sea mounting, you have huge cities which are threatened, such like Shanghai, Tokyo, London is a major cat potential event in Europe. Yeah, with the sea surge and storm and sea surge, and so it's maybe happening everywhere, but not at all to the same impact in terms of money.
And there are freak events, which I guess I don't know how you prepare for them. Was the reinsurance market ready for the snowstorm in Texas last month?
Yes, well, David is a specialist on modelizing, and every year we are, as a reinsurance industry, modelizing more, refining existing models or developing new ones, but there are many types of risks still not modelized today. And the freak storms, for instance, in snowstorms in United States, which paralyzed Texas recently, were not modelized, and the cost will be $10 to $20 billion. Yeah, and that is to say, already we know the first quarter 2021 is starting pretty bad.
How do you handle that? How do you plan for it? Do you balance risk across the world?
Yes, well, the idea for a reinsurer is to compensate, let's say, through different tools. One is by taking risk all over the world and hoping that, let's say, not everything will happen at the same time. And so that's one thing. The second one is to not only geographically, but also in terms of lines of business. As I mentioned, you may have many NatCat events, but otherwise everything will be smooth and okay. The satellites will be launched properly, and there will be less traffic accident or whatever. So that's compensations in terms of lines of business. And the third tool is that the reinsurance companies, they want to protect themselves as well, because we take big risks, but according to our surplus funds as well, and we try to analyze this risk to have a proper price and negotiate the price for it. And it's, of course, a matter of negotiation each and every year. And also look at, let's say, our own protection so that what we offer, we can deliver.
Olivier Choquet, I'd like to bring you in at this point. We've been talking about natural disasters. There has to be a precise legal definition, contractual definition. So in loss management terms, what is a natural disaster?
That's a good question. We can define the natural disaster is to be opposed to a man-made disaster. Some people talk about acts of God, but if we consider the human activity and the responsibility of human activity on the climate change, I'm not sure this definition is still appropriate, because God can do everything.
Yes, he's not the one who pumped the CO2 into the atmosphere. We did that.
That's a sad point.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we are here to talk about property damages. So we don't talk about human or social consequences of a natural disaster. A natural disaster can include various perils, as mentioned by David or Patrick. We can talk about flood, about earthquakes, about storm, typhoon, hurricane. There is forest fires.
Yeah.
And so they have in common that they can be very damageable and to create a high potential of destruction. It is not always the case. Currently, we have the example of the volcanic eruption in Iceland.
Yes.
I don't know if you have seen the very beautiful pictures, but there are no damages. So it's a very good point for the insurance sector and reinsurance one. So these dangers have in common that they can generate a huge destruction. They can appear on, four elements. They can concern earth, wind, water, and fire. So if we take earth, we can think to earthquakes. So the shock of the earthquakes lasts less than 1 minute in average, and it can destroy a lot of. It can create a lot of damages. We have the example of the 2011 earthquake in Christchurch, which had destroyed all the center of the city, of the town, with an amount of damages estimated between 6 and 9 billion dollars. When you have an earthquake, you have often aftershocks, and you can have hundreds or even thousands aftershocks. So it is a difficulty. Maybe we'll talk about that later. So after the earthquake, you have the wind as the storm, the hurricane, the typhoon, the hailstorm. Those perils can last about hours or even a few days. You have, because of the climate change, you have an impact on the nature of the hurricane. Olivier talked about Irma, which is a wet hurricane, which is more and more common, and the fires are always very fierce, but the eye of the hurricane is moving slowly, so the territories which are crossed have an amount of damages which is much higher than before. You have the floats, water as floats, which can last weeks and even months. And you have the forest fire, which unfortunately become very current all over the world. We can think to, for sure, in California, the bushfire in Australia, and we had even in Canada with the Fort McMurray, the fire which lasts more than 1 month in 2016. So these natural disasters are listed in our reinsurance treaty. We need to specify the scope and to define the notion of loss occurrence.
And when we were preparing this program, you mentioned that one challenge is to define precisely what a single event is. And you had a couple of nice examples.
That's true. This is a high difficulty. The one point in the reinsurance side is to study the allocation of individual claims, the question of aggregation of individual claims, which needs to be linked to one event. And if you take the example of Christchurch earthquake between September 2010 and December 2011, you had 2,000 aftershocks and just 5 main damaging shocks. And one big difficulty for insurer and reinsurer was to be able to allocate the damage to the event which had generated it, which is very difficult because sometimes you had the same risk who had been damaged 2 times by 2 different shocks. It is very hard. You have this problem of imputation, and for the reinsurer, you have also the problem of allocation of the cost, the claim cost, to one underwriting year for the accounts. So when you have natural disasters which are between 2 years, it's a hard job to split the charge of the claims.
And you mentioned flooding in Canada as well, with a geographic spread.
Yes, you have a very good memory. It was in 2020. There were major floods in Canada, and one seeding company had one event, a flood event, with a risk which was distant, which was separate by more than 500 kilometers. So there is a big question regarding the definition of one event. Can we consider a flood to be so with a so big distance.
Yeah.
It is not easy. So we have to study the definition of the treaty. We had a discussion with Patrick before our interview, and it is one key which is very actual with the risk of judiciarization. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what happens at CCR Re when you receive a claim? Can you talk us through the process?
Sure. So, CCR Re conducts a proactive claims management. So that means we don't wait to receive the claims notification from our client to act. So, when we learn about a natural disaster, the claims team works together with the underwriters and modelers. First, the first action is from the underwriter, which is in charge of the area where the natural disaster occurred. So he contacts his clients, trying to know more about the damage and the financial impact. Depending on the case, the official claims notification can arrive with a delay because the priority of the client is not to call his reinsurer, it is to deal with the claims.
Deal with the problem.
So that's a big problem. So CCR Re has two priorities. It is the first is to help as much as possible his clients, and the second is to respect his commitment, his liability under the treaty. If we have to pay, there is no question. It is not a point. So when we have an idea of the extent of the damages, depending on the case, we can set up a crisis committee to follow the disaster, the evolution. Our clients provide us with details regarding their claims management process. So we know how they deal with the claims, what is their politic with with the loss adjusters and the indemnisation process. If we are the leader of the reinsurance treaty, we will be more involved because we have more interest to deal with those claims. We try to work in an agility mode. So depending on the case, we can send specialists on site to study the claims with the cedent. We had already work like that. If I can give an example, I will talk about Irma and Maria, which was mentioned by Olivier before. We had two hurricanes separate by maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and we had a luxury hotel which had reached his indemnity limit in his insurance contract. So he tried to consider that the damages had been provided by Irma, but after by Maria. So he wanted to have this limit 2 times, which is so it is very hard for the reinsurer to understand if we don't go on site to check with the insurance company, because we have we
you need
trust
to understand
together
exactly what the liability is.
Exactly.
Whether it was caused by one event, by two, what was going on. And Olivier, I guess that's where you and your colleagues come into it.
Yes, exactly. Because previews and modelizations are very useful, but nothing beats a vision from the field. And
That's true.
precisely, that's where we are, the loss adjusters. And one of the first requests of insurers, reinsurers, is to give a first global estimate of the loss to organize the management of the event. It's not easy to do, but with our historical models or data and our first investigation on the field, we succeed in having a good idea of a first amount of the event. And then, after, we begin our works to support the victims and to assess damage.
Yeah. Patrick, if I come back to you, we've been talking about the damages. We've been talking about huge sums of money. You mentioned up to 100 million, 100 billion, sorry, if a hurricane goes over the center of Miami. Does the insurance sector have infinite capacity? What are its limits?
No, it is clear that the insurance industry altogether has not, let's say, endless capacity to face huge losses. First, maybe we have to consider the economic losses which happen every year. I would say there is a paper which has been published by a modeling company called AIR, and they said, well, you have roughly average $400 billion a year of economical losses. Out of that, you have maybe $200 billion of insurable losses, and out of these 200, you have maybe $100 billion insured losses. And so that's, let's say, a statement made by AIR. But we have as well the figures for 2020. In 2020, there were economical losses of $210 billion and insured losses of, on the Nat Cat side, of 82 billion. So it means that there is what, let's say, reinsurers or players in our industry call protection gap. Yes, the insurance industry altogether has a mission to service the clients, to service the people, to service the society and the corporation I was telling before. But this industry has limited resources. And this is the reason why at some stage this industry is saying this is not insurable. And this is because the insurance industry in France was saying flood is not, or drought is not an insurable risk, that the government in the 80s set up a compulsory scheme whereby the insurance industry had to offer to everyone, but everyone had to be insured and pay for it, be it exposed or not to Nat Cat, a small amount, but for the whole of the population, it makes things affordable. And the insurance companies, which were forced to give the cover, were reinsuring themselves with a state-backed scheme, and then the CCR. This is very unique over the world, but you have also some, let's say, private-public partnerships in some cases. For instance, in UK with Flood Re, in Japan for earthquake risk for simple persons. And we are talking now quite a lot about pandemic, and a lot of people say it is not insurable as of today with our limited resources. So we have to think, what can we do? And it is very clear that insurance and reinsurance has to work to be more efficient, to be able to offer more, but not go bankrupt by doing so. So that's a challenge.
And we have a map showing what's insured and uninsured around the world.
Yes, and then you can see, depending on this map, that let's say it is not so. It's not the same everywhere. You have Asia, where let's say most of the risk is non-insured. People in China, they are hardly insured. In Europe, let's say more people are insured, and even more in US. But as I mentioned, the difference may be also very big between European countries, and maybe also very different between lines of business. In let's say many countries, motor is a compulsory insurance. Everyone has to be insured, but it is not the case everywhere. And as I mentioned about homeowners, fire homeowners policy, it is compulsory in France. France is a country where there are a lot of compulsory insurance policies, but it is not the case in many others. So then it is up to your own decision, your own wealth or your own culture to be insured or not. Yeah. So the protection gap is not the same everywhere. And of course, the exposures are not the same everywhere. I was mentioning Shanghai. I can tell you that today, and in line with what David was saying, Indonesia is moving its capital because Jakarta is just due to be overflowed over the next decades, because they are pumping the water. Yeah. So the city is going down and down, and it will be overflowed in the next 20, 30 years. So they are moving making huge investment to move the capital to another island. And this may happen in some other places. It's just one example.
Looking forward, David, I'm coming back to you. In the short and medium term, what's going to change in the way that the insurance sector handles natural disasters?
Okay, so I think we have to understand that I was talking in the beginning of this conversation. I was talking about the increase of damages in the future, and we have to understand that a big part of this increase is not due to the increase of hazard and act of gods, but mainly because of the increase of buildings and vulnerability inside the at-risk areas. And so Patrick said that a large part of the population, 27% of the population is living in the coastal areas. And what we see even in France is that 1/3 of the increase will be due to constructions inside flood areas, coastal areas, and so it's difficult to have an impact on the natural hazards. Even if we can imagine at a worldwide scale, the whole humanity can have an impact on the emission of greenhouse gases, and so try to decrease the impact of climate change in the future. But it's more a global prevention strategy. It's not easy for an insurance company to have an impact by itself on the future of climate change.
Yes, this is a societal question, not an insurance question.
I think so. But it's important, for example, this study that we've made gave us numbers, and these numbers were used by the French government, for example, to have a clear view of the risk in the future, and this can have an impact on the public policies. And it's important to give these numbers. I think many insurance companies now, or insurance company, I mean some other insurance company are modeling this risk in the future. And I think the idea is to be able to provide informations to make insurance and governments really knowing the risk in the future. So. Doing that, I think we can have an impact on the increase of damage by prevention measures at a local scale. So, for example, by public policies that will take into account the future at-risk areas, not only the current risk area, but the future risk area, to determine where to build a house and industries. And the insurance is also working with, for example, industry companies and on the prevention. And I think increasing the knowledge of the future risk and what will be the risk in the next decades can allow insurance company to talk with industries to help reducing the impact of the future risk.
So it's really what Patrick was mentioning earlier with Jakarta on a less spectacular scale. We have to work to see where that risk is and work ahead of time to mitigate it or avoid it.
Mm-hmm. Well, our mission is surely as much as possible, according to what is insured, to pay when there is a claim. But maybe first to look at the risk and to try to prevent it by advising the insured what he should do. For instance, have a better lock system at his door, or for instance, build for a factory some defenses against floods. So there is, and this is more and more our duty, not only to give a cover, but to advise, to prevent the risk. And this is a mission which is growing in terms and also of rating with the rating agencies, looking at what is our policy as a company towards the environment, towards the society, and to help to mitigate, to reduce as much as we can, to contribute to reduction of this extent of the climate change, which is taking place. All what we can do is to do our utmost, and by talking with the authorities, by describing what will happen if we don't do anything, to the authorities, to public bodies, and come together to reduce as much as possible the extent of these losses. And it covers so many things, not only the NatCat, but it can be, so drought means also famine, and so many things are interlinked, and we have to work in that, not only to provide reinsurance cover.
So we have the modelling, we have the mitigation. Despite that, we know that the risks are going to increase. We know the frequency, we know the intensity is going to increase. Olivier Boniface, what challenge is that going to give to loss adjusters?
With the frequency, the intensity that increase, naturals sinister are more widespread. More and more people, more and more property are impacted by NatCat. And the challenge for the loss adjusters is to be able to cope with such new types of sinister. First of all, we need more loss adjusters on the ground, to support victims, to asset damages, to carry out high technical surveys. but we know that it won't be enough to deal with such as an earthquake in the large city with a lot of insured, maybe like Nice in the south of France, and we need more. And we think that we are sure that with technologies, we have a way to deal with such damage. We have developed new technologies. We are still developing, and we will develop other technologies. I can give you some examples. We've got satellite analysis to determine the extent of damage, to organize the management or teams. We've got also remote video investigations to speed up claims.
How does that work? What is remote video?
It works with the smartphone of the insured, and we see the damage through the smartphone of the insured.
Okay.
We've got also virtual counters. Virtual counters, we can collect claims and data from the insured directly, and so we save time. Of course, there is technologic devices as drone, 3D scanners, that with them we can get into places where human beings cannot go for safety reasons, for instance. So, in other words, I would say that the challenge of loss of our profession is the challenge of the augmented experts with technology.
Sure. Olivier Choquet, Olivier Boniface is using new technologies to explore the zone, to be more efficient in assessing damages. Can new technologies help you as well?
For sure. First, I think the reinsurance industry will indirectly benefit from the innovation described by Olivier, or the suggestion from David and Patrick to act in prevention. Regarding CCR Re, we are also working on artificial intelligence. We are inputting more and more artificial intelligence in our claims process. So I believe in the future, the combination between this artificial intelligence and the expertise from our company will enable us in winning efficiency and responsiveness toward the client in the claims process.
Thank you. Patrick Delalou. Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to rebound on the two Oliviers. Let's say, not that long ago, when there was a big fire at a big factory in Japan or Germany, wherever, we want to know the sooner the better, and not only the financial investors and the shareholders from reinsurance companies, but everyone want to know the extent of the damage. But you couldn't go. The area was banned because it still could be dangerous, etc. So, and you have it, let's say, this last year with Beirut explosion, the dreadful event. So nobody can go there for days. And save people, and you have drones which have been sent to look at the area, to try to have a first estimate of the extent of the damages. And of course, then day after day it's being refined. So that was the comment I wanted to make. But now I listen to your question.
Well, I was turning to you for the last word. In a sentence, how would you sum up the challenge of climate change for the reinsurance sector?
Let's say, opportunity and challenge. And this is our mission anyway. So I'm pleased to work in this reinsurance industry because it's a service industry and there is a lot to be done.
So, gentlemen, I'd like to thank all four of you for joining me here in the studio today. I've learnt a lot. I hope everyone watching has too. Thank you for giving us such a clear view of the impact of climate change, the impact it's already having, the impact it will continue to have on your sector. I'd like to thank all of you for watching. If this has whetted your appetite for more information, or if you want the latest news from CCR Re, you can subscribe to the blog on the CCR Re site, or follow CCR Re on Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Thank you for watching.